Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to We Read It One Night, the podcast where we talk about the books that make us want to stay up all night reading. I am Allison, a recovering Big Five book editor and romance novel hyper fixator, and I am so glad to be joined here today by one of my favorite, new historical romance authors, Alexandra Vasti. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here as well. Thank you for inviting me.
So I invited you on here today because I wanted to talk about this sort of ongoing debate that we have, not just in books, but like in TV shows and movies and everything about historical accuracy and like what that means. And I think especially because your upcoming book is your first explicitly queer, historical romance too, which I loved, by the way.
Thank
Listener,
you.
Ladies in Hating comes out.
But yeah, I do have another queer romance that's with the bi heroine. This is my first sapphic.
Yes. Yeah, yes. Right, because the you have the Halifax
Yeah, yeah,
Hellions.
yeah. My first
Yes.
novella, the first thing that I ever put out.
Yes.
Yep.
But yeah, and I think a lot of times people, specifically when it comes to like queer characters in historical media, they're like, that's not realistic. Why are these queer women getting their happily ever after and not being burned at the stake or committed or whatever? They want queer characters to be. So yeah, listener, we're going to talk about that, and then hopefully we're going to wreck some historical romance for those of you that care about historical accuracy, but also acknowledging that it could just be like historically accurate vibes. It could be books that we think are meticulously researched. It could be both. Because I'm always trying to evangelize historical romance, and I'm sure you are too.
Great. Fantastic. Well, tell me where you want to start.
Yeah, so I guess the place to start is like, how do you, as both like a British literary professor, right? And then also someone who writes historical romance. Like, how do you define historical accuracy?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think that well, it's a complicated question. How do I define
Yeah.
historical accuracy? Well, I think that there's a lot in historical accuracy and a lot that comes up in discussions about historical accuracy. But ultimately, anyone who is writing something from the historical past is making choices, right? And I remember, so like obviously this comes up with Bridgerton all the time. It's like a
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
perennial question about Bridgerton and what's accurate and what's not. And I saw an interview where they were talking about the costuming, right? Which is like very
Hmm.
explicitly in many cases not, historical.
Right, right. Like on purpose.
Right,
Nobody
right,
is thinking glitter is at the
right.
balls. Yeah.
But they said, when they deviate, it's not a mistake, it's a choice. And I thought that it was very just I think that for probably the vast majority, if not all historical romance writers, when we choose to deviate from the historical past, it's a choice. So, for example, right, there are many historians who think that in the Regency period, when you're at dinner, having your fancy dinner and you had to pee, you got up and peed in the corner. Now, I have never
I've
read,
not heard
yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
okay.
So I've never read a historical romance where that happens, right?
Right,
Like I assume
right.
you have not either. It's not, right? It doesn't
No.
happen so
Usually they don't talk about peeing at dinner, but yeah.
You're just right because that is not a level of historical accuracy that anyone is interested in. No one
Right.
wants that, and
Right.
and so we don't put that in, and we are making a choice that this is not, something that I want to reckon with.
Right.
I mean, very like so. There's no trash takeout, right? Like that was not a thing.
Right.
So if you walked down the street, there would have been like heaps of reeking trash. And we don't
Right.
encounter that. It's not
Yeah.
in Bridgerton. It's not in my it's I think maybe I've read like one historical romance ever that like mentioned like that the streets like smell bad from garbage
Someone's throwing like a piss pot out the window.
out the window or chamber
Ever.
pot out the window. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
But again, like people are not looking in that direction because that is not a level of historical accuracy that people want to engage in. So all books, anytime that we choose to write about the past, we're making choices about what we want to
Hmm.
include, and it's a choice, not a mistake.
Right. So is you as a writer, do you like get feedback from readers? Like, do you get emails or comments or DMs or whatever of people either like praising, what choices you make or criticizing, the same?
Not that much. I would say definitely way more often I get complimentary comments. Very rarely do I get someone like
Mhm.
attacking me about a specific historical detail. And sometimes people like will come at me and I'll be like, "Oh, you know what? You're right." I did not know with my first book that I put out that people in the UK don't use blocks like to describe like a unit of like you wouldn't say like I want
Oh,
like then or now. At no point is that a term that you would use. And I didn't know that. And it's fixed now.
yeah.
If you buy the book now, it's fixed. But if you have a first edition of my debut novel, it still says blocks.
Yeah.
And so, so rarely do I have people kind of come with direct criticisms, but it's something that you can't help but encounter online and online spaces.
Hmm.
Definitely, as you said, with queer romance, especially after, again, it always comes back to Bridgerton, but especially after Bridgerton kind of indicated that they were going to have a sapphic storyline in a future season. There was a lot of pushback against that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Even though, no one has come to me and said, like, how could you put these lesbians in your,
How dare you?
yet. I don't know. The book's not out yet, so maybe that's forthcoming.
Right.
But of course, it's definitely just something that I see as part of the conversation, as part of the discourse.
Yeah, absolutely. I do feel like it's probably happening less and less. I think obviously as we see more queer historical romance and like you have Cat Sebastian, KJ Charles, and Adriana Herrera, writing queer historical romance and you writing queer historical romance. So it's nice to see it lessening, but I think at the same time, I think it's good to talk about, why people tend to criticize like those choices more than the others. And I mean, like speaking of Bridgerton, I'm so excited for that, by the way. Like, cannot wait
Yeah.
for season 5 or 6 or whatever season it ends up being.
Yeah.
Um, but I saw so many people like not just complain that they, had changed their favorite male love interest in the Bridgerton series or whatever. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about in the end of the recent Bridgerton season, they changed Francesca's love interest from Michael to Michaela, which had me giggling and kicking my feet when I saw it. But I saw so many people complaining about that, and specifically also complaining about how Francesca's storyline has a lot of it deals with infertility.
This really bothers me. I'm gonna
Yeah,
get like deeply in the weeds right now about when he was wicked. So the book that we're talking about, he was Wicked by Julia Quinn, which okay, so I have been reading Julia Quinn since I was 11 years old. I was like an early adopter of Julia Quinn, like well before the Bridgerton books. I was reading them.
right.
I'm gonna like date myself. Right? You can pinpoint how old I am based on this. And so I have been reading Bridgerton or reading Julie Quinn forever. And I read all the Bridgertons as they came out. When He Was Wicked is my favorite Bridgerton book, so I completely understand feeling like, oh, this is my favorite book. I don't want any detail about it to change. But the
Hmm.
infertility storyline is in the second epilogue that was published like many years later. It wasn't even in the original
Hmm.
book. So like I understand that that is meaningful, but like that's not a key. It's
Right,
in the
right,
second epilogue. It's not even in the first epilogue. So
right.
that's my feelings about When He Was Wicked. Oh,
Yeah.
and I don't want to like I also dealt with infertility with my children. I found that second epilogue very moving, but like
Hmm.
that was not like a key part of their love story. I don't know.
Right.
For me, that's my favorite Bridgerton book. There's nothing about that book
Yeah, I love that one
uh
too. Yeah.
that is not that rests upon gender.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you do your research like for historical accuracy?
Yeah, so I'm a professor,
Yes. Yeah.
and so I have, I've said this before, but I don't think for me, like I've always loved historical romance, but for me, I never really felt like confident in knowing like how would you even begin to do the research until after I got
Hmm.
my PhD, because like you just spend so
Hmm.
many years learning how do you do research? Like what does that look like? How does it work? So for me, it really wasn't until after I finished my PhD that I felt like I had the skills to do the kind of research that I wanted to do to kind of like to make the books accurate in the way that was important to me. So for me, I look at a lot of real 19th century books. That
Hmm.
for me is the way that I am finding, the level of real historical detail that I want to put in there is look at the actual books from the period. The nice thing about writing in the 19th century is that like everything is out of copyright and many, many, many texts, newspapers, everything have been digitized and you can read them for free
Hmm.
online. So it makes research really doable. It makes it easy to fall into like a rabbit hole and like, oh no, I've read, I've spent 8 hours researching for this like one sentence that I want to put in. But just for example, like I have a novella where there's a part where like a character spills soup on her dress. And what I wanted to
Hmm.
like I knew what I wanted to have in the scene, which is that I wanted to have the different kind of matrons at the table say like, oh, this is what you should do to get it out. No, 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 this is what you should do.
Hmm.
Oh, this is the best way to, right? Like that's very, that's what people do.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, shoot, like how would you get a grease stain
Hmm.
out, in 1821?
Right.
What do you do? So what I did was I pulled up a bunch of like domestic manuals. There was a lot of like valets, like how to be a good valet
Hmm.
and how to get like the grease out of your, your
Oh, yeah.
guy's cravat.
Yeah.
I read all these different manuals to find out what would the remedies have been, or how would you take a stain out of fabric. So it's really fun, but then you're like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this for 8 hours and I'm made no
Right. Oh, yeah. Like, oh, I've
progress.
I'm knee deep in the Library of Congress and I'm not getting any getting out anytime soon.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah, definitely. So how do you decide like what to throw out the window? Like when you're like, okay, I have an idea for a scene, and then you do all this research and go down the rabbit hole, and the rabbit hole tells you that scene is not possible.
Not
Like,
possible.
yeah, at what point are you like, well, you know what? It's my book, so I don't care.
It depends on how much I want it, I think is the answer. Yeah. If I like sometimes I'll look up a word okay, so like in Earl Crush, which is
Hmm.
my second novel, there's a stampede of zebras, and the zebras are historically accurate. And I talk about this in the author's note, like where did I get the
Hmm.
zebras from? There was a real Earl who ha kept this, the Earl of Derby kept this like extremely elaborate
Hmm.
menagerie on his property. And so I based the animals that are at their castle. Every
Yeah.
single animal that's at their castle is drawn from this real menagerie kept by the real Earl of Derby. And in fact, I say in the author's note, like there were some animals that I thought were like so ridiculous. I was like, "Wait, I can't put that. It's too ridiculous. No one will believe it."
Right. People are gonna complain about it. Yeah.
Right. So the zebras are historically accurate, but I looked up the word stampede and it wasn't. Like it's like I forget
Oh.
now, it's been years since I wrote this, but it was like 1880 or something. I mean, like it
Yeah.
wasn't even close, really, like 70 years.
That's wild.
But I ended up keeping it because there's just not like a good synonym. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not a good word for stampede other than stampede. And I was like, all right, we're just keeping it because like I felt like
Right.
I needed it to get through the
Yeah,
scene
for
without like a lot of
readability.
right for readability, exactly. Or like blizzard. I've seen people talk about blizzard is not historically accurate, but it's
Huh.
like it's a really useful word, and
Right.
sometimes you gotta flex a little bit.
You gotta bend the rules. Yeah. Hopefully there's no like linguist professor going through and like highlighting, like, oh, Blizzard wasn't invented until 60 years after she wrote.
I'm sure there is. Oh my goodness, that's okay.
Yeah. But it's like it's all about like I think it's called the Tiffany paradox, right?
Mm.
Or something, or the
Yeah.
whatever, where like the name Tiffany is actually, from medieval times and is incredibly historically accurate. But then if somebody were to use Tiffany, even in like the Regency romance, readers would be like, excuse me? What are you
Yeah,
doing?
Joe Walton is the author who invented that term. And I've actually done a podcast with Joe. She's really
Oh
great.
yeah.
So Joe invented that name. She coined that, the Tiffany effect, which yes, exactly, is that, sometimes things don't sound historically accurate. And that's definitely something
Hmm.
that I grapple with too. In terms of this would have been right, but it doesn't sound right. And can
Hmm.
I still use it? Should I still use it? And again, it just kind of comes down to like how important is it to me?
Yeah.
I'm like constantly fighting with my editors about cat. So
Oh, wait.
cattle, like
Okay.
cattle,
Yes. Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
Regency included horses. It was like all like livestock.
Oh, okay.
And for some reason, I think that that's hilarious. And so I'm like constantly having my characters refer to things as cattle. I don't know why. It's just very funny to me. And my editors are like, no one is going to know what you're talking about. Where did cows come from? And I'm like, I don't care. They can look it up. If they're confused, they can Google it. Because for some reason that I'm like very loath to give up this historically accurate use of cattle.
I would, can I pitch for your next book? Have them ride a cow. Like just to
An
like kind of
actual
rub
cow.
it in your editors. They're like, why is a cow here? They're like, well, actually,
Uh,
a page ago, I said that she climbed onto Bessie the cow. So,
it's fine. It's fine.
right. You're like,
Yeah.
actually, it's completely accurate. Yeah. But so do you, I feel like a lot of particularly like big historical romance fans. I mean, you talked about like reading Julia Quinn since you were like 11. A lot of us like go deep into, the archives of historical romance and read it for a long time. Like a lot of historical romance readers are lifelong fans. And so I guess that are obviously not in your case because you have like a literal PhD in this time period, but for a lot of people, their their understanding of like the Regency era and the Victorian era and even like medieval comes from these books. And I think it's kind of widely acknowledged that like a lot of the person who really started that for like modern romance novels was Georgette Heyer.
Right.
Heyer, I don't know how to
Hair.
pronounce
Yeah,
her
hair.
name. Heyer,
Yeah.
who I've mentioned briefly on the podcast before, but I'll say it again, listener. Was very prolific and a very bad person, and I wouldn't recommend her books today, but was also like famous for like meticulous like research and like a lot of details. So, how do you sort of think that that basis of our genre of like for with someone like her
Yeah.
affects like how you write, how other like readers read and all of that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think that so Hayer was definitely famous for doing a ton of research, but Hayer also made up a lot of stuff that
Hmm.
has since become like part of it, like part of
Hmm.
no, no, part of people's understanding of the historical past. So it is very hard, I think, to kind of to separate out
Yeah.
what is real, what is a Hayerism, what are we getting from other
Yeah.
historical romances, right? It is tricky. I recently read and I looked it up, but I wasn't able to find like definitive confirmation of this.
Hmm.
But like so in a duel, like the term
Yeah.
deloping, do you know that?
The
Deloping?
term what? Sorry, you went out.
Deloping, like to delope.
Delope. That sounds vaguely familiar. I couldn't give you a definition though.
Elope is when you throw away your shot, like Hamilton.
Okay.
Like it was like one of the options. You could shoot to kill, or you could delope, which is like you shoot in the
Okay.
air and you miss on purpose,
Okay.
right? And that was one of the kind of like honorable ways of dealing with a duel. Like I am
Right.
glad I'm gonna go through this duel, but like I don't actually want to kill this guy, so I'm gonna
Right.
shoot into the air and deloping. And it is a real word, but apparently, and again, I looked it up, but I wasn't able to totally confirm this. Hair popularized that term like 100 years later, and it was real, but it just wasn't a term that people used
Nobody used
until
it.
hair.
That's
That
wild.
is like the term. That is what you got. So it's very hard to know. There's a whole website.
Yeah.
I think it's called like Heyerisms or something that's like devoted to what things did Heyer make up. So
Oh, that's very useful.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's truly very interesting. She did have a very just, outsized impact on historical romance as it grew and developed.
Yeah. Yeah. For the better and for the worse.
Yeah, I mean,
Definitely.
she
Yeah.
was very foundational in forming a lot of the tenets of the genre, and a lot of times what
Hmm.
people think is historically accurate is what Heyer wrote down, even though it's
Hmm.
not. I think that so one thing that I come back to a lot in discussions of historical accuracy and like how do we know, how do we is to look at books from the period, right? So like if
Hmm.
we look at Pride and Prejudice, I think like it's sort of funny because there are a lot of things that happen in Pride and Prejudice that people might be like, oh, that's not historically accurate, if it were published today. But
Yeah.
obviously it is because she wrote it in the period. It was not a historical novel. She was writing it about her
Right.
life, her world that she currently lived
Right.
in. So, for example, a criticism that comes up sometimes of historical romance is like, oh, well, this just isn't historically accurate because we all know that if you were alone with a man, you were compromised.
Hmm.
And this is just totally false. And like if we look at Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth and Darcy are alone together all the time. Like
Yeah.
over and over and over. And no one is like, oh, Elizabeth, you're ruined. Like
They
that's
must
not
get
even a
married.
comma. That's not even a
Yeah.
term. That's not even a word. So it's just like if we look at the actual text from the period, we can see what would have been the real social norms, what would have been an
Hmm.
actual violation of what was acceptable. And yet, I think, and sometimes I think it's fun, right? It's fun to think like, oh no, she's compromised. Now they have to get married. It's
Yeah.
like
I
a
mean,
fictional device.
I love it. Like
Right,
I'm not gonna pretend like I don't
right,
giggle when I see that in the
right. That put
book.
it in a book. It's great.
Yeah.
But to think that like that's definitely how it happened and everything was that strict. We can look at books from the period and see that like no, of course that's not the case, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's funny that like you bring up stuff like Pride and Prejudice because I that's like one of the things that like we retell so many times. And I think that because of that, like everything gets blurred about like what's historical, what's modern, like we're Regency people like just like us, like, like Jane Austen goes to get coffee or like whatever, like
Jane Austen loved coffee, actually. Jane Austen was a huge coffee
that
drinker.
checks
She wrote
out.
about how like she can't live without coffee. She drank, like I think like 8 cups of coffee a day. Yeah.
But like somehow I feel like if someone wrote a Regency romance that was like the heroine is a writer and drinks 8 cups of coffee a day, people would be like, what is this like Starbucks obsessed?
I have seen that. I have seen someone criticize a book where the heroine drinks a ton of coffee, a historical romance. And I'm like, dang it, you
Like
guys. No.
our number one Regency writer.
Yeah, coffee was so
Yeah.
popular.
Yeah.
And it's like you can like if you're like, was coffee real? You can like open up Pride and Prejudice and like control F, coffee, and it's like full
Right.
coffee.
Right. It's in there. Yeah. Like why don't we I'll pull out my like Penguin Classics bound. I'm sure in one of like the many, many like extras they have in those books. There's like probably a whole one about how Jane Austen like drank 10 cups of coffee while writing that book. Yeah. Yeah.
I think coffee is like is a Tiffany effect thing, right? Like it sounds
Hmm.
modern to us. And I also think it sounds like kind of American, like, oh, we love our coffee
Mm.
here. And
Right.
no,
The British drink tea.
we're
Right. How dare
tea. Right,
you?
right, right. But no, they're like constantly serving coffee and bringing out cups of coffee and here's
Yeah.
in the book.
Yeah. Although speaking of tea and Jane Austen, did you know that Earl Grey tea is named after her like one great love or whatever, like TM? Like, the movie Becoming Jane? the
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
the guy that's her love interest, and then they break up in the end and it's tragic or whatever. He eventually becomes Lord Grey, and Earl Grey tea is named after him.
Hmm.
So
I did not. I did not know that. I did know that the flavoring of Earl Grey tea, which is bergamot, postdates the Regency. So like if people are having
mhm.
bergamot tea in the Regency, that's not historically accurate. And do you know how I know that? Because I got it wrong in my book.
I received a 10-page letter from a
Oh!
reader being like, excuse me.
No, actually, no one has ever brought that up. I think because no one would ever think that that is not right. I discovered it, and that was an insight.
Yeah.
I had already written the book, and I was like, you know what? And it was still in edits. I could have changed it, but I was like, I like this part so much that
Yeah,
I won't change it. No one has ever mentioned that.
it's fine. All right, well, listeners, you know what to do now. I want you to flood
Love
Alexandra's
my DM.
DMs. Be like, look at her, she's a
I'm going
fraud.
to slowly reveal all the things I have gotten wrong in my books over the course
Right.
of this podcast.
Yeah.
Please prepare yourself.
And then we will campaign. We'll do like a hate campaign. I will be organized. When you like see a bunch of like dummy accounts commenting on your, that's
A
me, just letting
bergamot.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, how dare you? But oh, so one thought that sort of came up with me as like as you mentioned earlier that you write in your author's note that you like mentioned the zebras and like historically accurate thing, and that's something that I see in a lot of historical romance. Like author's note are pretty much like I feel like it's weird if you don't have an author's note a lot of the times for historical romance like nowadays.
Right. I feel like this is a new thing. But
Yeah.
I love to read them. I figure
Oh
like
yeah.
that the readers who were like, this is not interesting to me, can skip them. We're like me, we're like, oh, I can't wait to hear about like all the little, nerdy research. Like I am there for that. I want to hear about every
Yeah.
little bit of nerdy research you did for this book. Please tell me everything. So that's the audience I'm writing
Yes.
author's notes for.
Yes. But I think it's interesting that we see more of those. Like I feel like it's a response to like getting quote unquote called out for like, historical accuracy or whatever that means. And I think it's like interesting that we have that trend in historical romance, but like you don't see that in really like contemporary romance, for example. And meanwhile, you have authors writing about careers that they have, no idea or anything about them, about being a lawyer or being a sailor or whatever. And like I've seen enough people online complain about being like, this author doesn't know like anything, clearly doesn't know anything about like X career. But like we don't see authors' notes in like contemporary. Like there seems to be like a different standard of realism, I guess.
That's interesting. I mean, you do see it a lot in acknowledgments. People will say like, "Oh, I talked to the president of the such and such, and thank you
Right.
for your time that you." So I do think it's still there, just maybe in a different. I think of the author's note more as like something I would tell my students, right? Of like,
Hmm.
I think of it as like this is fun, and I think you'll want to know these fun facts, not as like
Hmm.
a defensive, like don't come
Yeah.
to me. Like that's not really how I am thinking about my author's notes. I'm really
Yeah.
thinking of them more as like this is stuff that I thought was really fun, and I think that you, reader, may also
Yeah.
find it really fun. But I have started doing them more and more, and I wish that so like I didn't do them for my novellas, and one of my
Mhm.
novellas has like a really ridiculous premise, and I really wish that I had sort of shared like here's kind of what I base that on the because I do think that
Mhm.
stuff's really fun. For me, it's fun.
Wait, can you share that now? You share
Yeah,
which
yeah, yeah.
novella and
Okay,
what
okay.
the
So one of my novellas, the premise is that our heroine she's trying to start a sheep farm and she needs to, this is called In Which Winnie Halifax is Utterly Ruined
Yeah,
is the name.
okay.
So she's trying to start a sheep farm and she's single. She's like a 20-year-old single woman and they won't rent the land to her because she's a single woman. She's like, no, actually, I'm married, totally married. Because like, he's Canadian,
Look.
like that kind of thing. So she claims that she has this husband back in London, and they're like, what's his name? And she just like makes up a name kind of off the top of her head. So then it skips to like 10 years later, and of course there is someone with this actual name, right?
Of
Because
course. Yeah.
it's novel. How else is it gonna work? So she starts doing advertisements and says like I'm Mrs. So and so, and his lawyer sees his name in his advertisement and is like, well, this lady's claiming she's your wife, and like our hero is like he's like whatever, she's
Yeah.
gotta be plenty of people with that name. And the lawyer looks it up and is like, no, like these are the marital bands, and this it's got your name in the bands, and the real bands were destroyed in a fire, and like you might actually be married to this woman because there is no way to prove that you aren't. And he's like, what? You know? And so he goes and hunts her down and thus becomes
Yeah.
well. So when I was doing the research for this, I was like very curious if this was like historically plausible, this like goofy idea that I had. And it turns out not only is it plausible, this kind of stuff happened. People would be like, "Yep, I am married to that guy." And they would like have to go to court and the guy would be like, "I don't know you. I
I've never met.
you, right? But the records were not centralized. So another thing that would
Right.
happen is like you could go to like parish A and like get married, and then go to
Hmm.
parish B and be like, I have a different name, and get married in parish B. And not only did
Hmm.
this happen, it happened kind of a lot. Like to where there were whole rules and systems and courts of law about like how do you prove your identity. And it's before computers, there's not
Right.
right? It's actually very hard to prove who you are, to prove that you're this person. So yeah, so this stuff was totally plausible, and I found plenty of court cases with kind of bonkers real life events.
Honestly amazing. I'm guessing most of them did not end like in an HEA
It's an
falling in
adorable
love.
romance. I
Yeah.
feel like
Tragically.
tragically, probably not. Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately not.
Yeah. It does remind me of like that the Tessa Dare book when a Scot ties the knot where she like
Yeah,
makes up a fake fiance and like has been writing to him this whole time.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and then like
yeah.
kills him off and then he comes back from the dead. He's like, actually, hello.
Yeah. I love that book so much. I'm sure that was in the back of my mind. The reason that I wrote this plot was because I had so these were self-published novellas, and
Hmm.
I was gonna write two about these twins. And the books, they
Hmm.
had the titles of I'm sorry, not the names of the twins in the titles. There's Argo
Yes.
Halifax, Matilda Halifax, and they had like a woman on the cover. And people kept saying, I want you to write a novella about the brother. They have a brother, he needs a novella. Da, 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 da,
Yes.
da. And I
Oh
was like,
yeah.
all right, fine, I'm gonna write this. And I wanted I wanted to have a woman on the cover, but I
Hmm.
wanted Halifax in the name of the title. So I was like, all right, how can his wife already be named Halifax? I was like, I know what, they're not gonna be related because that's not okay.
Right.
Though that
Right.
probably is historically accurate. That's a level of
Well,
historical
cousins.
not
Yeah.
interested in. And so I was like, what if she made up this fake
Yeah.
name and turned out to
Yeah.
be? So that's because I wanted a woman on the cover. That's where
Yeah.
this came from.
Fabulous. And you know what? It worked. So I do notice I've never seen anyone complaining about how no one's marrying their cousin in historical romance. Like,
Right.
where where's the Mr. Collins and Lizzie Bennet shippers? Like, I don't where
Not
did that
that word
go?
that ever. Yeah, right. No one complains about that. No one is like, man, why don't these guys have syphilis more? Right? Like, if only there was so much more
Well,
syphilis, right? Like, no, because we don't want to read that. Like, we don't want to read about like our
he
hair
was a rake.
birth, right? Like, we don't.
Yeah.
So it does. It's very interesting the things that people choose to take issue with. And I do think a lot of it comes back to what they're used to in historical romance
Hmm.
and what they're not used to,
Yeah.
right? The sort of established idea of what we see in books. And so then things that challenge that, people kind of feel like they want to push back against that. Like, oh, I've never encountered this before, so it must be wrong.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's the matter of like sprinkling in just enough quote unquote historical accuracy while continuing to make it familiar. I there's this is like historical costumer on YouTube that I watch. Her name is Karolina, and I'm forgetting her last name, and she's Polish, and she made like a video about historical accuracy, which was like one of the reasons I started thinking about this more recently. But she pointed out, she was like, here's, 30 pictures of orange dresses from 1740. But if I were costuming a movie that took place in 1740 and had a ball scene and everyone was in like replicas of these orange dresses, people would throw a tantrum, even
Right.
though it's like technically historically accurate.
Is, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Or like a place that I intentionally deviate from historical accuracy is Regency hair because Regency hair was really goofy looking. Like
Yes, it's very
enormously
silly.
goofy looking. And so I'm just we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about what your real hair probably would have looked like or like men's underwear. It's like a lot of times they
Hmm.
don't wear underwear, but when they did, it was very silly looking. So I just try not to think about what that actually would have
Didn't
looked.
they a lot of times like their underwear was just like their shirt, like the bottom half of their shirt? Didn't they like tuck it in basically like a diaper?
Yes, so that I think I've seen that. So I'm going to be honest, historical fashion is not like a huge area of interest.
Right, right.
My character's like, and then she put on her blue dress. The end. I
The
just
end, yeah.
not like something that I personally am super compelled by, so I don't
Yeah.
go into a lot of details. But yes, I think like in the late 18th century we see that, or like even if I think for maybe a lot of the 18th century, we do see the so they'd have like quite a long men would have like this long shirt and then you would just like tie it in a knot between your
Like a
legs.
little diaper.
That's your yeah. But I think by the 19th century we do start to see men sometimes wearing actual underwear, but it's like
Okay.
something like pants. Like
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
pants light pants that you would wear under your pants. Yeah.
Yeah. Because sometimes I'm just like, I'm imagining, when people put like Darcy coming out of the lake kind of scenes and he's in this big, like flowing, beautiful white shirt. And I'm like, would there be skid marks on there? Like, is it
Wait
stained at the bottom?
a second. But they did untie it to go to the bathroom, just to be
Well,
clear.
yeah. Yeah. I assume it wasn't a literal diaper.
Right,
Like,
right,
it
right,
didn't
right. Like
function
I
like a
want to assure
diaper.
the listeners, it was not a little diaper. They could untie it.
Yeah.
It did not require a valet to untie their
Yeah. But
diaper.
it's also like so in Eloisa James's Wild series that takes place like at the end of the 18th century.
Yeah.
Yeah, love those books. They're great. Eloisa James was actually my like college advisor. So like every
Oh,
time I read
really?
those books, I'm
Florida?
like, yeah,
Oh, wait, that's so
yeah.
funny. So I went to Columbia and
Oh
we
wow.
had for graduate school and there was like a consortium it was called where you could take
Yeah.
classes at CUNY and Fordham and I don't remember where else, but
Oh.
various other places. And I was like, kept thinking like I could take a class with Eloisa James. Her real name is Mary Bly, which as you know,
Yes.
listeners may not know.
Yeah.
I could take a class with Mary Bly. Like, oh, I've been with her for like, 20 years, 15 years, like I could do it. And then but she teaches Shakespeare, and ultimately
Yeah.
I chickened out because I was like, I don't know anything about Shakespeare, and I don't want Eloisa James to think I'm dumb.
To know that I don't know anything. She was like, I had a very strong, like, not like other girls phase. Like, my return to reading and being open about reading romance was like 2020 and actually started with The Viscount Who Loved Me because someone picked that for our book club. Um, and but like having her as an advisor in college was like I was like, oh, like I kind of want to read her romance novels, but then I'd be like, would it be weird to read like a sex scene and then like go into like Shakespeare class the next day and be like, yeah, let's talk about cod pieces.
I mean, like you really can't talk about Shakespeare without talking about like sex jokes and
Well,
stuff.
oh, she loved it.
Right. I think that that is a feature of teaching Shakespeare because I also, when I teach Shakespeare now, I've just said like I'm not an expert, but I
Yeah.
still teach it, so despite that not being my area of expertise. And I'm always like, let's talk about this sexy stuff. I don't know why. I think that's what it's like to teach Shakespeare. You have to like, you just really want to like teach the students, at least I do, and I assume Eloisa also does, that like the historical past was not this like bland, you know,
Yeah.
sexless, humorless time. Like it's funny, it's sexy. Like that's the so
Yeah. And
right.
Shakespeare is full of dick jokes. Like you cannot honestly teach Shakespeare without acknowledging the number of dick jokes in every single play, like the tragedies and the comedies. He throws them everywhere.
Shakespeare could do it all.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so do you want to get into recommendations or did you have anything else to add to the general discussion of historical
Yeah.
accuracy
Okay,
and
yes. What I want to add to the general discussion of historical accuracy is that I like to blame everything on the Victorians.
yes,
That's my position, my position as a
understandable.
scholar, as a writer. So, and just I think that part of the reason why we see people often having an idea of the past as being more restrictive or more kind of purity culture-ish than it
Hmm.
was is because there was a really strong push in the Victorian period to repress those things from
Right.
conversation. So like if we look at like early novels in the late 18th century, they're pretty open
Yeah.
about sex work. Um,
Pamela, Mole
yeah, Pamela,
Flanders.
exactly. Right, exactly. Even in Pride and Prejudice, right? Like it is very clear that when Lydia and Wickham elope, they're having sex.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
that. Elizabeth even says she's like, "Oh, they're not married." And she thinks to herself like, "Oh, that makes sense." And she thinks about Lydia. He wouldn't have wanted to marry her, but for this purpose, she can see that Lydia would be good enough
Hmm.
for this purpose. And it's obvious
Yeah.
sex, right? Like it's not and Jane Austen is like, she's 20 years old when she's writing this book. She's a young, unmarried woman, of gentle birth, and she knows what that is.
Yeah.
She knows what that is enough to make
Yeah.
jokes about it, right? So
Right.
but when we get into the Victorian period, that's when there starts to be like, oh, we can't really talk about this stuff. So the Victorian period is where we can't talk about pregnancy anymore. We have to say in an interesting condition. We have to be
Mm.
like, we can't really talk about what these things are. And I think for whatever reason, that really has a hold on kind of like the
Hmm.
popular imagination. And a lot of times there's like a flattening of the past that like, oh, that's how it always was. And that's
Yeah.
definitely not true. Like there were many, many, many centuries in the past that weren't like the Victorian period.
Right. And even in Victorian period, like people have always been horny and
Oh,
like you
yes.
can
Yes.
suppress that in the mainstream, but people will always be horny.
Absolutely, yes, right. Like I don't in any way want to indicate that there was not all
Yes.
kinds of like
Yeah.
stuff happening in the Victorian period. In the Victorian period is where we see, I always think it's very interesting to look at like erotica and pornography. Can I say this on
Hmm.
this podcast?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. We talk
Okay,
about romance novel. Like,
okay. All right. I always think it's very interesting to look at like erotica and pornography and like
mhm.
what's trendy because that goes through trends just like anything else.
Yeah. I didn't
And
even think
in
of
the
that.
Victorian
Yeah.
period, man, they loved femdom so much. That was so trendy in the Victorian period. And also,
Ooh.
I'm sorry to say, stepson and stepmother porn
Uh,
so
uh,
everywhere. Everywhere in the Victorian. That was like the trend. Everyone's like, whoa, this is the hottest thing I can think of. I don't know why.
that's incredible. Oh my God.
No, odd, odd trend. In the Regency, which is my period of choice right
Yeah.
now, lesbian porn was very popular. That was
There,
like,
well, yes, yes. Well, you mentioned in the book the like political cartoon about in her book Ladies in
oh,
Hating Listener. The like political cartoon it was like two friends kiss or like it was like
oh my
just
God,
friends or
I
like whatever
love
and
this so much.
it's like a political cartoon about two like essentially very well-known sapphics in the Regency era like having a kiss. And
Right.
like
So it's such a funny cartoon. So it's these two women are like canoodling on a park bench, and their husbands are behind them in the bush, and they're like, "What do we do? What do we do? How do
should we
we?"
kiss?
And then, oh, I wish that would not have been that would
Yeah.
not have been the lesbian
Yeah.
lesbian cartoons were everywhere. So
Oh
so
yeah.
so these are the reason that we kind of know who these women were is because the cartoon uses their actual names, and that was actually very
Hmm.
common. Like it would be like Lady W, so you could kind of
Hmm.
speed of it. But this cartoon actually used their actual names. But my favorite part about this cartoon is the title. So it's like a title and a subtitle, and the
Yeah.
title is Love à la mode, which means like which is like trendy, like the
Yeah.
fashionable love, which is so funny. Like
Yeah.
someone's writing this and like, you know what's really trendy right now? Girls kissing girls. I like
Lesbians.
love that was someone was like, this is a huge trend in 1811. And then the
Yeah.
title is or two good friends. I'm like, man, we have
Yeah, best
that joke
friends.
today. Historians called them roommates. People are making that same joke, literally over two.
Yeah.
I love
Well,
it.
it's like it's so interesting to like know that like that like that political cartoon was something that presumably was in like the newspapers that people read every day, right? That wasn't like hidden
No,
like
that
in
was
the like
out in
black
the
market erotica
mall.
section.
Right. Yes,
But like
exactly.
if it were two men, like
That
suddenly
would
that artist gets like transported to Australia or whatever. Like, you know, and it's something that I remember I was doing a project on Virginia Woolf in college, and I came across like a transcript of a parliamentary meeting when they were discussing, and this was in like the 1920s, so this is like
right.
even 100 years later, where they like are having a conversation of like, should we ban lesbians? Like we've banned gay sex, but like, should we ban lesbians? And like the transcript is basically all the men being like, no, because if we make it a law, then the women will find out about it, and we can't let
We will
them
find
know. So like
out.
literally the only reason it wasn't made illegal because they were afraid that like that would expose that would like tell the women that it was possible
Very
to
funny.
have sapphic sex.
That's very funny. Yeah, no, that's something that I mention a lot is that sex between women was never criminalized, unlike sex
Hmm.
between men. And a lot of the concern about women having sex outside of marriage or things like that was really came back to inheritance and inheritance laws.
Hmm.
And the thing about lesbian sex is that there's, there's no challenge. We're not,
Yeah.
it's not procreative. So, because of that factor, I think
Hmm.
we do see it historically as not being seen as problematic or as dangerous or as something that needed to be kind of legislated or defended
Hmm.
against. There's one court transcript that I've seen where this guy's like trying to take his wife to court for like having sex with like their female neighbor
Yeah.
and the judge is like, I'm sorry, that doesn't count as adultery. And the guy's like, well, I don't know what to do. Like, I can't get her to come back to our house, whatever. And the judge is like, so what are they doing though? Like the judge like can't conceptualize like what is happening in the bedroom. It's
He's
very
like pushes up the glass.
yeah.
So,
So tell me
can you
more.
actually be more specific?
Yes. Yep.
And you know what? Me too, Judge.
You know what
Like,
this shows though because sapphic pornography was very popular, but obviously this judge was not partaking.
right. The poor judge's wife, like, if he doesn't know,
That's a
what?
good, well, you maybe didn't have a wife. I don't know.
I don't know. Speaking of
Very-
historical accuracy, there's too many heroes giving cunnilingus. Like, obviously, that was not historically accurate.
Oh man. Well, that's another thing that you can see in pornography is like what was trendy as far as like a sex
Hmm.
act. Even like even looking at historical romance, like now, like if you it's uncommon to read a romance novel that doesn't like that to an open door romance novel that doesn't include
Yeah.
yes. But like when I started reading romance, that actually wasn't that common. It's really
Hmm.
just like what kind of trends we see produced and reproduced. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. There's one I always tell the story, but there's like this dictionary of slang that I use a
Hmm.
lot in my research because it's fun to like
Yeah.
incorporate real historical slang and kind of, I just enjoy it. So there's one of the editions, I forget which one it is. It's maybe like 1780 or 1711. It's one of the earlier editions of this, and he mentions larking as this term, and he says it's like it's so an obscene act. It's like too obscene to define, and and he defines a lot of stuff in this dictionary. So of course historians were like, "What is the obscene
What does
act?"
it mean?
It's too shocking to define. Well, it turns out it's titty fucking. This poor man was like horrified by the he was like, I cannot even write it
Oh
down.
my
I'm
God.
shocked.
How how could people even conceive of
Oh,
this?
yes.
Like, I
He was
can't.
like, oh my God, how can you do that?
It's incredible. Um, but it did bring me the when we were talking about way earlier, Jane Austen and like Pride and Prejudice, and you mentioned like Lydia Wickham, like it brings to mind an article. It was published in like a law review by Courtney Milan.
I teach that article all the time. Yeah.
Yes, so I love that article.
Find
So
predators. Yeah.
yeah, so like listeners, basically the article is like talking about how Wickham is like acknowledged to be a predator, like in the book, and like how everyone is sort of recognizing that it's really fucking weird that this like 30-year-old man is going after the 16-year-old, and like because a lot of times when we talk about like historical times, we're like, yeah, of course he was like 40 and she was 16. Like that's totally fine. And it's like interesting how we use sort of this argument of historical accuracy to like to justify, I feel like more often to justify like the bad things in the past and to normalize them. Whereas like people in the past were generally pretty decent too. Like they kind like they understood, like
Think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that sometimes it makes us feel better about ourselves, right? Like, look
mhm.
how far we've come. We no longer think it's okay for 16-year-old women to marry 30-year-old men. But like people back then thought that was messed up too, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I absolutely think that there can be or like in my first novel, like the hero is an abolitionist, and I
Hmm.
often see people being like, well, everyone thought slavery was fine, so you
Yeah.
can't judge them. But yes, you can. People were like tons of people were abolitionists.
Yeah.
It's absolutely something that would have come up, that people would have talked about, that people would have known. And the so I have him give like the speech in front of the House of Lords.
Hmm.
And the speech is a real speech from 1791 that was given by the prime minister. Like this is
Yeah.
some like fringe thing, right? That like, the prime minister was the one who was saying like
Yeah.
slavery is an abomination. It's a stain on our national character. It's the worst thing England's ever been involved in, right? Like, and so I do think that that sometimes there is this tendency to think about the past as simpler than it was, as in
Hmm.
some ways worse and in some ways better,
Yeah.
not to kind of allow for it to be as complicated
Right.
as our present is complicated.
Yeah. I like that phrase that the phrasing of both worse and better because like it's worse insofar as it allows us to feel better about ourselves, but it's better, when you want to criticize the
Right.
elements
Exactly. If
of
only we could go
today.
back to when things were so nice. But
When
you're right.
things were wonderful, right? And I'm like, no, I don't know. I like being able to vote and also have hot water showers. Every time a poor footman has to bring up buckets of hot water in like a historical romance novel, I'm like, God
It was
bless my
heavy.
water pressure.
It took so long. I know.
Yeah.
I know. That would have been the worst.
Yeah.
That job, carrying the hot water.
Right. I'm like, you could not pay me enough. But then I'm like, you know what? They probably didn't pay them enough either. Like, actually, the historical fact is that they weren't paid enough.
It works. Correct. Correct. Yeah.
There's a part in Ladies in Hating, there's like a bath scene.
Oh
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
want to get too a spoiler, but like when they're hesitating to get in the bath, like every time I read that scene like twice now, and I'm like, get in the bath. I'm like, the
Right.
water's cooling off.
Oh, you're
Like,
right.
what are you doing?
No, they're like fighting. I remember writing it and I was like, all right, chop chop, ladies. Water. But then I think I felt like the cat had like cleverly left some of the cans over the fire. And I felt
Yeah.
that because she grows up, she's the butler's daughter. So she grows up in service. So she would
Hmm.
have known like she's like, I'm not gonna waste this hot water. She's like, I'm gonna keep
Yeah.
the cans on the fire. She knows exactly how much work that
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I'm like, it's so sexually tense and it's wonderful, but also
you're
get
back.
in the hip bath.
Man, when I was writing that book, I was visiting oh, what's it called? It's slipping my mind right now. It's a museum in New York, and
Mhm.
it's like a house from the early 19th century, and it has a lot of boy, I can't think what it's called right
Is it
now.
the
But anyway, I was
Frick?
no, no,
No.
it's a little house.
Okay.
That they made into a museum, and it has all the furniture from the early 19th century. It's very
Hmm.
cool. I was touring with my friend Colleen Kelly, who's also a historical romance writer. So we
Mm.
were like going around, we're like, look at this. And then we get to the bath and we were both like, because it was quite small actually. We were both like historical romance writers and we're looking at this tiny bath, and I'm like, historical
I'm like,
accuracy is maybe gonna get shoved to the side
right.
because this bath is actually very little.
Right. Because I dare you to find like a historical romance reader who doesn't love like a good bath bathtub sex scene. Like everybody, you know what? Across genres, not even just in
Yeah,
historical
right,
romance. Like, don't
right.
tell me you don't want that in contemporary too. Everyone loves a sexy bath scene. So you know what? If it has to be large to fit this absurdly large Regency era 6 foot tall man, like then that's what's gonna happen.
Sure, absolutely.
Right. Okay. All right. Do you wanna wreck some books?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I always recommend Joanna Lowell, who is
Hmm.
also a professor.
Oh, I
And
didn't know that.
yeah, and her books are so wonderful, and she is someone who really loves research, and will go and like to wonderful, elaborate lengths of like going to the museum to like feel the different fabrics to like create
Ah.
that. Yes, she's absolutely fabulous. So her research is incredibly thorough, and it's incorporated in these really delightful and wonderful ways. Her one of her books that I really love is called A Sure Thing. I don't know if you've ever
Hmm.
read that one.
Yeah, I did. It's with the bicycles, right?
Yes,
The
and the
bike
hero
race.
is a trans man, and she is so lovely and thoughtful about how she writes about his gender identity and his experiences, and it's a very gentle book, but she also really
Hmm.
doesn't shy away from the complexities of his story and his experiences and his
Hmm.
friends' reactions to his experiences. I mean, it's just absolutely wonderful. So I could not recommend Joanna Lowell more highly, and especially for something that we were talking about, which is that like sometimes people are don't know about queer stories from the past and don't
Yeah.
know and 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 just haven't been exposed to that as part of the
Hmm.
historical romance narratives that they've read. So I
Yeah.
recommend Joanna Lowell. Courtney Milan, we've already talked about, is another
Yes.
person who does tons of beautiful research and writes a really good author's note. She
Hmm.
was someone that I feel like was early in like writing these long author's notes, or at least for me, that I remember
Yeah.
feeling like she was one of the first people who was really doing them. And I just remember being like, oh my God, this is so fun. Like just pages and pages of like where these things came from and what she was inspired by. Yeah, so those are
Yeah.
the two
Yeah.
people that I would definitely recommend.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, yeah, like trans characters in historical romance, like Alexis Hall has oh my goodness,
A
A
Lady
Lady for a
Bird.
Duke. I wrote it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, let me look at my notes. A Lady for a Duke, which is about a trans woman, and it's like friends to lovers, and there's some Napoleonic Wars. And that actually inspired me. I think Alexis Hall might mention it in an author's note, but so I've recently read two nonfiction books like about trans history and like just how like vibrant and prevalent it is. And it was Before We Were Trans, and I am horrible at remembering author names, so I will link them in the description, listener. But Before We Were Trans and Female Husbands,
Yeah.
um, which like I would like more if there are any either Alexandra or any other historical romance writers listening. A female husband historical romance would not go awry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that comes up, that discussion comes up in A Sure Thing as well. The
Hmm.
notion of female husbands. Yeah, I mean, there were so many ways to be queer in the past, and so many happy stories. And that's one thing that I think, I remember when the Bridgerton thing came up, people were like, well, how could two women live happily ever. Like that's a tenet of romance. They have to live happily
Hmm.
forever. And people
Yeah.
kept sort of saying they'll have to change history. And that made me so sad. It made me so
Hmm.
sad because there were so many people who lived so happily.
Yeah.
And it just really kind of broke my heart that we are not teaching these stories and keeping them alive and that we're kind of letting them get
Yeah.
vanished, in the sands of time. It just really
Yeah.
made me want to keep writing more. And also, my job is being a professor, so it made me want to keep teaching these stories too.
Yeah. And I mean, you also see the same thing with like historical romance about characters of color, right? About like
Right. Oh, absolutely.
you have, historical romance authors being like, well, yeah, my books are all white because it's just not realistic to have like happy BIPOC character, like have BIPOC characters get happy endings. And it's like, You know, it's shocking, but it's also not shocking that there are people that think that. But I think obviously Courtney Milan has a lot. She writes, Asian characters in the Victorian era. And I think Diana Quincy has like the Clandestine Affair series that has like Palestinian main characters, which is really interesting to see. I feel like I've been seeing a mini trend of actually like Middle Eastern and Palestinian main characters in romance. I think Evie Dunmore also had it in the last book in her The Gentleman's Gambit. Yeah, it's like, and which is also about like,
Lebanese, and so is Evie.
yes, yes.
And there's many, 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 many wonderful writers writing right now, writing people of color based on real people. Mimi Matthews is another one. Adriana Herrera, Liana De La Rosa. My friend Addie Dulac has a really fun
Yeah.
series right now that's like just really delightful and is kind of, I think, in some ways drawn or inspired by her experiences growing up in the Caribbean. So it's a very like
Oh, awesome.
past, like we see in the Caribbean. Just so many people right now,
Yeah.
and there's so much, so many great books out there. Yeah, so there's so many people, so many exciting stories being told right now, that are based in historical realities.
Yeah, like very much.
London and the Regency was very diverse. So we can. I mean, even Jane
Yeah.
Austen. Jane Austen has
Right.
of color. Like we don't. It's yeah. I don't know. It's. I really blame Georgette Heyer for writing
Yeah.
a lot of the Regency in ways that unfortunately have hung on for a long time.
Like the Brontes like have like like Heathcliff is implied to be like a mixed race man, and like Rochester's wife is from the Caribbean, and like we don't get an explicit thing, but like she could be a woman of color. I've seen a lot of like analysis about that. So, yeah, writers of the period were like BIPOC people were living and
Yes, around
falling in love.
and function. Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
right.
It's. I think we're in a very exciting moment for historical romance and seeing a lot of actually historically accurate stories getting told in ways that are
Mhm.
really lovely and fresh and fun and real.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like it's the boost that the subgenre needs because we all, historical romance has been sort of falling by the wayside a lot. And I think that because for all of the times it's just been Georgette Heyer. It's just been like the great grandchildren of Georgette Heyer, basically. And now more and more so. I mean, those stories have always been being written and have existed, but more so they're getting, I feel like, more mainstream attention of like, okay, look, this is what historical romance can be. Like, here's all this untapped potential.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much
Of
for coming
course.
on.
Pleasure.
Um, Listener, if you haven't read Alexandra's books yet, I don't know whether you've been living under a rock or something, but like you should. I want to say, so my endorsement is, and for longtime listeners of the podcast will understand how impactful this is. I think your books are the only ones, including your novellas, that I have all of them that I've read with my eyeballs. So I'm an audiobook reader normally, and all of your books have been eyeball reads. Partially because I read the Halifax Hellions like while they were still indie, so like there
Oh,
was an
before
an
the
audiobook and I
audio.
was like tearing through them, and then all of your like your trad pub books like Ne'er Do Well, Earl Crush, Ladies in Hating, like I as soon as they're available on NetGalley, I'm like, hello, like
Oh,
please, I
thank
would like this. So
you.
that also necessitates an eyeball read, and like
Yeah.
so, listen, there's my endorsement right there. Like, I'm sure the audiobooks are also great. I haven't listened to the audiobooks yet, but I'm sure they're also phenomenal.
Thank
But
you.
you're an eyeball read. So, listener, this episode is going to come out before Ladies in Hating comes out, but it comes out September 23rd. So, you
23rd in the
should.
US and the 25th in the UK.
Oh, okay. And you should pre-order it. And you're running a pre-order campaign that like you get little goodies from certain bookshops, which I did because I really wanted the like drawing of
Yeah, the
hat.
art. God,
Yeah, I was like,
so
oh,
good.
yes,
I love
please.
her art. Yeah, thank you. Yes, we're doing a fun pre-order campaign that with a couple of different indie bookstores. I really love independent bookstores, and I'm really just grateful for the support that they have shown me. So yes, a few different indie bookstores are doing kind of each one has some kind of different little treasure you can get if you pre-order with them.
Hmm. Yeah, so that'll all be linked below. And do you want to let them know where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find, well, I have a website, which is alexandravasti.com, or you can find me on Instagram or TikTok at Alexandra Vasti. It's very easy to find me by my name. Yeah, and Ladies in Hating is out in September, and the premise of this one is our ladies are rival Gothic novelists who
Mhm.
get trapped in a house, a sort of a haunted Gothic mansion, as they're trying to do research for their next book. And, the line between love and hate is, quite fine, as all romance readers know.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So pre-order that if you're listening to that after it comes out, get it from your local indie or your local library and look out for Alexandra's next book. Thank you so
Thank you
much for
so much for
coming.
having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was so nice chatting with you. All right, listeners, that was so much fun. I loved chatting with Alexandra. I loved chatting about like the historical stuff and historical details. Y'all know that I am autistic and that's one of my hyperfixations, and it's always so much more interesting to talk about it with someone who is an expert basically in that topic. So she was really great. I seriously can't recommend her books enough. So if you haven't read them, for real, go check them out. They're also really, really funny. Like I don't know why I didn't mention they're very funny. Like I think that's one of the reasons why I really like them as an eyeball read and why I'm also sure that they'll be great as like a audiobook read. But if you like India Holton or Tessa Dare, like any like rom-com authors, like she's Alexandra Vasti should be your next read. As always, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at We Read It One Night. You can find us on Threads at We Read It One Night as well. We're no longer on Twitter for various reasons, and we're most active on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. You can email us, we read it one night at gmail.com. And please leave us a rating and review if you like this episode. And if you have like a topic or an author that you would like us to bring on, please let me know. As always, if you have like a book that you want us to talk about, you can leave that in your review or you can DM us on Instagram or wherever, send us an email. Thanks so much for listening, everyone, and Godspeed, comrades.